opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. Blah. Son of man, he said, eat this scroll that I'm giving you and fill your stomach with it. So I ate it, and and it tasted as sweet as honey to my mouth. And then he said to me, Son of man, go to the house of Israel and speak my words to them. You are not being sent to the people of obscure speech or difficult language, but to the house of Israel. Not to many peoples of obscure speech and difficult language, whose words you cannot understand. Surely if I had sent you to them, they would have listened to you. But the house of Israel is not willing to listen to you, because they are not willing to listen to me. For the whole house of Israel is hardened and obstinate. But I will make you an unyielding and hardened as they are. I will make your forehead like the hardest stone, harder than flint. Do not be afraid of them or terrified by them, though they are a rebellious people. And he said to me, Son of man, listen carefully and take to heart all the words I speak to you. Go now to your countrymen in exile and speak to them, saying to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, whether they listen or they fail to listen. And then the Spirit picked him up and set him in a place, and he was prepared to be the prophet of this people of Israel. This is the wording of the Lord our God today. Praise his name. Let's be seated. I want to, before we get started in a majority of this, to take a look just a moment at something that is a little difficult to understand. He sends him to a house of Israel, a people who are not of obscure speech, people who will understand your language. And yet, God says, if I sent you to the people who didn't understand you, they would hear you. And they would believe, but not to the people who understand your language. They're not going to hear you. They're not going to listen. They're not going to believe. Two thoughts. First of all, I believe in this piece, what is kind of a side teaching to what we're going to talk about today, but you need to understand this. God sends us to people who are like us. He sends us to our neighbors. He sends us to our family. He sends us to the places that we work. He sends us to people who understand us, and we understand them. That's who Ezekiel's with. He's with his people. Though they're exiled, they're people who understand each other. Okay? Secondly, I think in how we can best understand how if Ezekiel was going to go to another people, they would listen. I don't know about you, but as I was growing up in the church, I would hear Reverend Buis week after week after week, Harry Buis. And great man of God, great preacher, great teacher. But then a guest minister would come and he would speak. And lo and behold, I would always remember that guest speaker's preaching. How about you? You know? Pastor Greg, kind of here all the time, and then you get like a guy like Nate Bold, and he speaks, and boy, we remember that forever. That's really tough for pastors to handle. But no, the truth of the matter is it's a change. It's a different voice. It's a different people. When we even look for experts today, the old saying goes, you're not an expert unless you're 50 miles away, right? Nobody around you could ever be an expert in what you needed to hear because you live with them. There's a little bit of that going on here, I think, as God's describing this to Ezekiel. At least maybe we can understand it that way. All right, back to our passage at hand. Whether or not you are intricately involved with politics or healthcare or the world environment of business, or whether you're a teacher having to meet new standards of teaching and processes and funding, you and I think, can look at this world and say, it's a rebellious world. Agreed? In a nation so rebellious, but yet not unfamiliar with God. not unfamiliar with the one who we say we put our trust in. In God we trust as a nation. Not unfamiliar with words like faith and the Bible and church and worship. We live in a nation very familiar with all of these things, and yet it is a rebellious nation. Those who are marketeers and advertisers misuse our words, our religious words, all the time. Our religious concepts. Look at the advertisements selling trucks today on TV. No guts, no glory. There's a lot of stealing of our language in this world, in this rebellious world, and yet no one wants to hear the truth of the language that we have to share. Still holding to the belief systems and structures by man is the world that knows that there is a God, and yet they deny the truth of this one living God that we believe in. Pastor Nate had asked the church, Big C, and you, the church, to be active in the world, right? To go out and be the church in the world, to show them Christ, to live in and through your everyday life and show them the church. Many churches today seek ways to be accepted and go into that world in which we are called by the Gospels to go and work in, to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're called to be a witness, a light into that darkness. And yet, a lot of times we find ourselves trying to bridle ourselves with the world in such a way that then begins to hinder the church itself. Sharing the truth about God's Word and the language, but in some form and fashion that maybe just is a little bit on the edge of what we would expect to find in the Scriptures, and finding ourselves in a, let's say, an entertainment world versus a worshiping world. Ezekiel was called into being a prophet in a world similar to the one we live in. A rebellious people. That's why they ended up in exile. God said, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm going to bring a people here to conquer you, to bring you to exile, to bring you to a place in which you might find that it's so bad, so hard to live in, that you will turn and follow me once again. That's the kind of world that we live in. We're called to interact with His creation, to take a stand, to be His change agents in a broken world, to be prophets to a rebellious people, to be the words of Jesus to a world that has distorted His words. God calls His church. God works. God works through His church, not in spite of. I think there are those in church culture today who would probably find it easier to say, let's just get rid of the church and start over. But God will continue to work through His church until He has made it complete. It is His bride. Wrinkled and all, He will make her complete and use her to the end. So, to change the world and to help it see that it is messed up and broken and lies hopeless, we are called, like Ezekiel, to this world. But I think, in many respects, we're going to find the same results as Ezekiel did. Our passage tells us that God calls him to this calling of being a prophet. But the world's not going to listen. The people are not going to listen. How would you like that charge? Put yourself in the place of a manager over people and be told, I'm going to pay you to do this job. This is how I want you to do it, but not a single one of those subordinates under you is going to ever listen to you. How would that feel? No thanks. I'll pass. I'd rather be a subordinate. But that's the thing